Hello everyone, we are back with the third part of the chapter number 5, reproduction in plants, for class 7th. As we have already seen the parts of the flower, now the next topic that we are going to discuss is about the pollination. Now here in the diagram you can clearly see that we have a picture of a complete flower which consists of all the four whorls, that is sepals, petals, anther and stamen and carpel. So all these are the four whorls which makes the flower a complete flower, and it's a bisexual flower as it has both male and female reproductive part in it. Now in the picture itself you can see that a honeybee who sits on the first flower, and on the pollen part where anther is present. Anther is a part where pollens are present, it's a part of the stamen, and these pollen grains stick to the legs of the honeybee that remains stick to his legs, and when this insect moves to another flower, the pollen grains of the first flower are being transferred to the another flower. So this process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called as pollination. After the pollination is being done, the fertilization process is being carried out, but we'll talk about it later on. Now first of all, this pollination, after it is being done, the male reproductive part, it fuses with the female reproductive part, and this is how fertilization happens. We know it, we have already seen it in class 6th. Now there are two types of pollination, self pollination and cross pollination. Now in the figure itself you can see when the honeybee sits on the anther and collects the pollen grains, or that is sticked on the legs of his, and the same is being transferred to the stigma of the same flower. That pollination is known as self pollination. When on the same flower it happens and pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma is known as self pollination. But when this bee transfers the pollen grains from one flower to another flower, it is known as cross pollination. Okay, so there are two types of pollination, self pollination and cross pollination. Self pollination takes place in a bisexual flower, but when pollen grains are transferred from anther of a flower of one plant to the stigma of another flower of the same plant or that of a different plant, but both the plants must be of the same kind, it is called as cross pollination. So even all unisexual flowers which are there, they are cross pollinated. Why? Because there either can be stamen or carpel. So cross pollination always happens in unisexual flowers, whereas self pollination happens only in the bisexual flowers. Then the next topic is agents of pollination. That is, we have seen cross pollination takes place mostly with the help of some agent. In the earlier slide we have seen that it is being carried with the help of insects. So along with insect there are other agents like wind, water, birds, bats, all these act like agents of pollination. Now insect pollinated flowers we have already seen, but some of the characters must be there, that the flower must be brightly colored, it must have a good fragrance, and then only the insects will get attracted towards it. Okay, for collecting nectar they will get attracted, and this is how the pollen grains will be transferred. Then the next agent is wind, which is an abiotic factor. Now wind pollinated flowers must always be light in weight, they are light in color also, because wind does not understand the brightness of the color, but the petals also are smaller as compared to the insect pollinated flower, and even they lack petals. Some of the plants may even do not have petals, but still they will be pollinated by wind. They have a feathery stigma and they produce a large number of pollen grains which are lightweighted and can be easily carried away by the wind. So this is pollination being done by wind. Then the next agent is water. Water pollination takes place in aquatic plants. Here the pollen grains are carried away with the help of water currents. And the last one is animals. Now animals, it can consist of even birds and bats. So animals also carry pollen grains with them when they move from one place to another. If they have certain fruit and then it is being transferred, but pollens they have been transferred mostly through bats as they sit on the flower, for collecting the sweet substance that's present inside it. Okay, so this was all about the agents of pollination. Then the next is fertilization. As I've already told you, pollination and fertilization are two different things. But fertilization only occurs when the pollen grains are being transferred from anther to stigma. Once the pollen grains are deposited on the stigma of a flower, after some time a small tube known as pollen tube is generated. You can see in the diagram a yellowish color tube is being generated from the pollen grain that passes through the style, which is a part of a female reproductive organ, and the male reproductive cell, that is the pollen grain, it moves through this pollen tube and reaches up to the ovule. Here it fuses with the egg, forming a zygote. You can see in the third picture zygote is being shown. This is called as fertilization. Okay, when the male gamete meets with the female gamete and the fusion occurs and forming a zygote, it's known as fertilization. And once the fertilization is being done, the ovary in the carpel becomes a fruit and the ovule becomes the seed. So fruit contains seeds. Understood? That is, ovary contains the ovule. Ovule is the seed, it converts into seed, and the ovary converts into fruit. The seeds germinate to produce new plants. You all know this, that whenever seeds fall somewhere or even we sow it, it is giving rise to a new plant. So this is how sexual reproduction in plants take place. Now the next part will continue in our next